have time for questions and answers at the end. So if you could please hold the questions and answers to the end, that'd be great. First, we're going to hear from Marshall Lubbock, Chief Legal Officer of Juvenile Law Center.
Good morning, and thank you all for coming. So we are here this morning to announce the filing of a class action lawsuit in federal court, just filed about 20 minutes ago, I think, on behalf of a class of youth and some of their parents against the Glen Mills Schools. Glen Mills is the oldest reform school for kids in the country. It was actually founded here in Delaware County in the early 19th century. Interestingly that it was called a reform school, since it turns out it really was anything but that. The lawsuit is the second lawsuit that has been filed against Glen Mills, but I think importantly, what we want you to know about this lawsuit is that not only is it focused on issues of excessive force and physical abuse against the children at Glen Mills Schools, it also is focused on the educational deprivation that kids experienced at Glen Mills, and I'm going to let Maura McInerney, who will talk about the educational claims. We also have a broader concern about who we want to be held accountable for what happened at Glen Mills. We are not only suing Glen Mills Leadership and Glen Mills staff, some known and some unknown, but we have also named state officials working for the State Department of Human Services, as well as state officials at the Pennsylvania Department of Education. It turns out that sometimes it takes a number of entities to allow something to go terribly awry at some of our public institutions and even private institutions that are serving public functions. And what happened at Glen Mills in terms of the culture of violence, the culture of intimidation, the culture of abuse, and the culture of denial of so many rights that these children possess was not solely at the hands of the people who worked at Glen Mills. There were incident reports that were routinely made available to the State Department of Human Services. The response was that there was a likewise routine response from Glen Mills that would offer up a correction action plan. Invariably, as we began to collect records and look at that information, they were all strikingly similar, using the same boilerplate language to talk about what they would correct, and then another incident report would be filed, and another boilerplate correction action plan was filed. And that cycle continued. And DHS never stepped in until this year. First beginning with an emergency removal order, and of course within the last week, finally pulling the license of Glen Mills, an action that was long overdue. This lawsuit has been filed, as I said, in federal court. It's a class action. The lawsuit is seeking monetary damages on behalf of these kids. We are seeking a minimum of $10 million. We are also seeking equitable relief in the form of compensatory education, which again, Maura will speak more about, for the kids who literally had no education, virtually no education at all, and were denied special education rights as well. The lawsuit is filed seeking to redress kids' rights under both the 8th and 14th Amendments to the Constitution. The 8th Amendment prohibits cruel and unusual punishment, and the 14th Amendment provides a similar kind of protection through a substantive due process analysis. We have also sued the state and private individuals at Glen Mills for a series of violations under state tort claims, state negligence and intentional conduct, some of which is codified, some of which frankly just derives from the common law. We want to make clear through this lawsuit, as I said, that there are multiple entities that are responsible for what happened here. And we want to also recognize that today is the day when we begin to change the cycle that was at play there. That we are going to end that cycle of report, remedy, to finally beginning the process of healing what happened to the families and what happened to the children at Glen Mills. The stories, we have 4 named plaintiffs in the litigation. Please read the complaint, it's long, it's over 150 pages, but their stories are there, and their stories are vivid, and their stories are horrifying. And they typify the kind of information that we have been hearing for months about what happened to the children at Glen Mills. We are deeply concerned, obviously, about the pervasive violence there. But we also see the filing of this lawsuit today not only as an opportunity to ensure that we can finally begin the process of healing for these children and for their parents, but that we can also begin the process of holding everyone accountable for what happened, of holding everyone accountable for allowing Glen Mills to prosper on the backs of our children. Let me turn it over to Maura. Mike.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm Mike Mckinley. I'm a partner at Dechert, which is a global law firm that's headquartered here in Philadelphia. We are very proud to partner with Juvenile Law Center and the Education Law Center in this critically important lawsuit. Abuse of children by anyone is intolerable, and it is especially troubling that these abuses occurred at state-regulated facilities that were paid to educate, treat, and rehabilitate these youths. The removal of the remaining children from Glen Mills was long overdue, and we hope that this lawsuit will at least begin to rectify these severe wrongs. I'll turn it over now to Maura.
Youth in our juvenile justice system are among the most educationally at risk of all students. When courts placed these children at Glen Mills, it was with the expectation that they would be educated. Instead, they were subjected to systematic abuse, pervasive intimidation, and trauma, which directly undermined their ability to learn. In addition, they were deprived of an education based on state curriculum standards. Instead, they languished in a limited self-directed credit recovery program, or they were forced to forego their high school education altogether and were given outdated GED prep books based on unilateral decisions made by Glen Mills staff. The credit recovery program was almost completely online. It lacked any direct academic instruction. Youth received little to no support from untrained Glen Mills staff who were given the designation of teacher while in the credit recovery room. Youth like Derek was among the 30 to 60 students in that room, was a student with a disability who received no education for weeks. He struggled to earn any credits online, and he completed the first quarter of school in 9 months. Students diverted to the GED program were often too young under state law to substitute their high school education for a GED. They struggled to complete a GED course book that again was outdated, had no opportunity to take the GED exam, and then received no further education in contravention of their rights. They were left stranded with no way to take the GED exam, little hope of passing it, and no accumulation of academic credits towards a high school diploma. The educational needs and rights of students with disabilities were completely ignored. There was no system to provide legally mandated services. Children with disabilities were never evaluated. Parents were shut out of the special education process. The local agency did not even participate in this special education process. And all students were given the same one-size-fits-all online credit recovery program or GED books, with no differentiation of instruction, no support services, and no individualized educational programming. Youth like Derek and Walter were subject to abuse and discipline based on conduct that was completely related to their disabilities. Rather than providing positive behavioral supports as required by law, students with disabilities were actually denied their right to an education for behavioral reasons, subject to restraints, aversive techniques, and corporal punishment that is banned in our Pennsylvania schools. They exhibited and were subjected to great trauma and abuse, and they experienced and witnessed all of this while trying to learn. Walter, a 16-year-old who was previously educated in a private school because he had such significant disabilities, was disciplined when he articulated his educational needs and refused to participate in a credit recovery program that he could not access. He was denied any education for 2 months and then was punished by being deprived of a career-ready course. He was transferred to a GED program, was unable to access any of the workbooks, did not accumulate any credits towards a high school diploma. Glen Mills programs, in sum, deprived hundreds of youth of a real education, and it set them on a trajectory towards dropping out of school, a greater likelihood of experiencing homelessness, unemployment, and incarceration. Today, we seek to hold Glen Mills and state officials accountable for the physical, emotional, and educational harm that these children suffered, all of which have lifelong consequences for them. Youth lost months and years of academic instruction, fell behind their peers, and are now unable to graduate or pass the GED. By allowing Glen Mills to operate in the shadows without any oversight, monitoring, intervention, or review, state and local educational officials caused an unconscionable deprivation of education. Their failure to act has cost many children their future. This should not and cannot be tolerated. We have brought claims under the 14th Amendment for deprivation of equal access to education, deprivation of a property interest in education, as well as claims under the Individuals with Education Disabilities Act, the Section 504, and the Americans with Disabilities Act. The horrific abuse and stark deprivation of education at Glen Mills may be the worst example that any of us have ever seen. But it is not the only children's institution that is failing our young people. Glen Mills did not exist in a vacuum. These violations of children's rights in residential placements are the result of failures on many levels, by individual actors, by local education agencies, by state agencies. We seek to hold our agencies accountable for these failures, but also hope that they will work with us towards ensuring that children in state care will not be placed in such institutions, and that they can be supported to remain in their communities with the supports and services that they need and to which they are legally entitled. Thank you. We will take any questions now.
How many plaintiffs? I don't think it says.
4 named plaintiffs.
And those are all former students?
They're all former students.
Step in front of the microphone.
Oh, I'm sorry, of course. 4 named plaintiffs, all former students. They are suing on behalf of a class, and we believe the class is certainly hundreds of youth. It may well be thousands.
Could you tell me about how Glen Mills treated these students after the reports started circulating about allegations of abuse and mistreatment?
I'll tell you some of the reports that we heard, and you can supplement. What we heard from some of the kids that we spoke with was that they were encouraged, first of all, not to say anything negative. We heard that when parents would visit with their children, or if there were phone calls, that Glen Mills was listening in, so that it was quite clear that the stories of intimidation that we had heard all along about what was happening with kids there, that rather than Glen Mills dialing back, they dialed up in terms of how they wanted kids to respond and how they were treating the kids there.
I would just add 2 other notes to that. In one case, there was a family who spoke Spanish. They were only allowed to communicate in English so that the person who was listening nearby could understand everything that was being said. Certainly parents were intimidated, children were intimidated. In addition, at one time, they circulated a pro forma form that said, "Dear Judge, I would like to remain at Glen Mills," and the children were told that they should be providing this at all of their court hearings.
You say that there were, to your information and belief, none of the teachers there were licensed, and few, if any, had education degrees. Can you speak to how you came upon this, or why you believe this?
It was based in part on our looking at the Pennsylvania Department of Education website and teachers that are listed on that particular state agency site.
And there have been rumors, you talk about the state not acting sooner.